Hi, everybody. I'm Josh Earl.
And I'm Will Garcia.
And together we're the Hoops Guys. And we're continuing our 2014-2015 NBA season preview today with the New York Knicks. Tell us a little bit about how their season went last year, Will.
It went bad.
Yes.
They went 37-45, but that's a bit interesting and kind of an oversimplification of what was really a very trying and tumultuous year for this team. They really struggled in the beginning of the year. It was looking really, really bad, and they made a really concerted effort towards the end of the year to try to get into the 8th playoff spot, missing it by just maybe 1 or 2 games, I think, to the Hawks. So they barely missed the playoffs. And of course they didn't have their first round pick, so they didn't really get anything to show for it out of the lottery.
Yeah.
So it wound up being a pretty rough year for them under Mike Woodson.
Yes. But it wasn't all rough. There were some good things. As a team, they didn't really turn the ball over much. They shot well from mid-range and above-the-break threes. They were 4th in turnover rate, 2nd in above-the-break true shooting attempts, which is an awesome part of the XPPS stats by Ian Levy over at Nylon Calculus. Check them out. It's good stuff.
Yeah, no doubt.
And they were 7th in field goal percentage from above-the-break threes and 5th in mid-range field goal percentage. So those generally somewhat tougher distance shots, they converted them pretty well.
They did.
And they protected the ball pretty well. Defensively, they forced a decent number of turnovers, and they protected the paint, not necessarily the rim per se, but the non-rim area of the paint pretty well. Finishing 9th in opponent's turnover rate and 3rd in the paint TSA defensively and 1st at defensive field goal percentage in the paint. So those were a couple of the good things that the team did well last year. But some players definitely stood out as having pretty good years as well.
Yeah, Melo.
Yes.
For one, talk about 27 points per game on 56% true shooting percentage.
Yeah.
That's effective. 56% isn't exactly, LeBron or KD level, but that's still above average. And for that high of a volume, that he had a phenomenal year. He rebounded the ball at a career high in that number.
Yeah.
For rebounds per game. Operated well from the post. Shot 40% from 3 for the first time in his career for a season, so that was pretty cool for him. Almost made the 50-40, or I don't want to say almost made the 50-40-90 club, but made the 45-40-85 club.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty good club.
Yeah.
So in terms of efficiency and putting the ball in the basket, he did a really solid year yet again for this team.
Yeah.
And J.R. Smith is another player who, again, pretty controversial for a wide assortment of reasons.
What?
Dennis Rodman called him the new Dennis Rodman. Can you believe that?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. I won't necessarily compare him on the court to the Worm, but on the court, he was a much improved three-point shooter from the year before, and really did a solid job in a bit of a smaller role.
Yeah. Another guy who kind of stood out, didn't get a whole lot of minutes, but when he did, he played well, was Cole Aldrich.
Absolutely.
So the guys at Nylon Calculus have this other really cool stat, which is basically the number of points a player saves per 36 minutes through their rim protection, and it's adjusted in regards to league and positional averages. And Cole Aldrich was 17th last year.
Yeah.
And that placed him ahead of incoming starting center Samuel Dalembert and ahead of exiting starting center Tyson Chandler. Cole was also 5th in the NBA in total rebounds per 36 minutes, just behind beasts by Andre Drummond.
Wait, take my nickname for
nicknamed
it.
by Will Garcia. I'm
There
giving
you
you
go.
the credit.
There you go.
And ahead
Only
of
royalties.
Omer Asik and DeAndre Jordan, who had
Yeah.
a monster rebounding year. And Cole was also 30th overall in offensive rebound rate, second in defensive rebound rate, and fourth overall in total rebound rate. So Cole Aldrich had a phenomenal year, and hopefully he gets some more minutes this next season. Another guy that really had a good year was Pablo Prigioni, or Priggy Smalls, as he's nicknamed. He is super efficient. He had great shooting splits, 46% from the field, 46 from three, 91.7% from the free throw line.
Yeah,
all
crazy.
while rocking the third best assist to turnover ratio in the entire league at 3.8. So I would cast my vote for Priggy Smalls for president.
Absolutely. In terms of guys who can facilitate in the offense while keeping the ball protected and shooting extremely well, the Knicks brought another one of those guys in this year. We'll talk about him in a bit.
Yes.
But you can do a lot worse than Pablo Prigioni.
Very much so.
You really can't do much better.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that you can't do much better, there were a lot of things that the Knicks could do better.
Yes, there were. What were some of the things that they struggled with, Will?
They didn't get to the line very much. This is a team that was only 26 in free throws per field goal attempted. So they weren't, in terms of driving to the basket, and I get it, when your main scorers are J.R. Smith, who operates a lot from the perimeter, and Carmelo Anthony, who operates a lot in post-ups in isolation on the perimeter instead of driving to the basket quite as much. You're not going to rack up quite as many fouls, but 26 is really low. And then they also took a lot of mid-range jumpers, which in and of itself isn't a terrible thing, but you'd prefer to to not be 29th in terms of mid-range true shots attempted against. Shout out to Ian Levy, and have that drop you down to 23rd in XPPS.
Yes. Which of course is expected points per shot, which is a measure of your shot selection.
Yep. How are they on the defensive end?
They gave up way too many good shots and trips to the line. So
the stuff they didn't have themselves.
Yeah, opponents wound up shooting at the 23rd ranking in terms of effective field goal percentage against the Knicks. The Knicks were 29th in opponents' free throws per field goal attempts. They were dead last in defensive XPPS, meaning they gave up really good shots to opponents, and they were 25th in actual points per shot. So not only did they give up really good looks, but they also didn't defend those looks very well. They were 25th in allowing corner threes, 22nd in allowing above the break threes, and they were 27th in defending above the break threes. So generally speaking, defensively, they kind of let the opponents kind of run all over them and get what they want, trips to the line and shots at the rim and threes. So not the best defensive year.
Absolutely. But some people who did have a good year, like your boy Jose Calderon, got put onto this team this year.
Yes.
Wanna talk about him a bit?
So I'm currently wearing a Calderon jersey, and much like Priggy Smalls, I'm a big fan of Calderon. I really like guys who are very good shooters, who are also strong decision makers and facilitators. So those two guys are really high on my list. Defensive issues aside.
Right.
But Calderon is one of the best facilitators and shooters in the entire league. And he's going to be a great fit in a triangle offense. He shot 45.6% from the field, 44.9% from three, and 82.5% from the free throw line.
That's basically identical to what your boy Priggy Smalls did.
And that was in a much bigger role than Priggy too.
True.
So and much like Priggy Smalls, he's a great decision maker. He was 4th in the league, just behind Priggy Smalls, at assist to turnover ratio last year with 3.7. And he's a very decisive player. So when the ball reaches his hand, he's not going to just kind of kill shot clock time and dribble around before figuring something out. He's either going to move it, shoot it, or attack the defender, which are all of these things, the shooting ability, the decision making, and the decisiveness, are all three things that are really important and valued in the triangle. So he's going to be a perfect fit for them.
Yeah, not only that, those are also things that really counterbalance some of the deficiencies of this roster.
Yep.
So having a guy like Calderon really helps. Speaking of a guy who could really help, what's your take on Samuel Dalembert? Do you think he could really help?
I don't think he's a good rim protector / deterrent and a pretty solid rebounder, and he's going to help mitigate any drop-off from Tyson Chandler no longer being there. But he's not nearly the team defender or defensive linchpin that Tyson was. So while the rim protection's still going to be there and the boards are still going to be brought down, he's not going to be as impactful as Tyson, but he's going to make it so it's not a super steep drop-off.
Exactly.
Yeah. They also brought in, he's probably not going to get a whole lot of minutes, but I like his potential in Shane Larkin. He had a rough rookie year in a really deep backcourt rotation for the Mavs last year, and that was coming off of an ankle injury in Summer League. But he showed really good shooting ability and decision-making at the University of Miami. So if he is able to get any minutes this year, he should be a pretty decent fit for the triangle.
Yeah, agreed. Speaking of another guy who could be a really decent fit for the triangle, I'm going to talk about my boy Jason Smith right quick. Yeah. And I've got a pack of ramen right in front of me because this guy, he cooks in 3 minutes because he's a ramen noodle all-star. What did he get? What's his contract even like? Do you know?
I don't remember.
You don't remember? I know it's way too low.
Yeah, well, I think it's a small, like, short-term contract, too.
Yeah, I think it might have even been close to the minimum. Yeah. I'll add an annotation saying what it actually is down below. I can't be bothered to look that up right now. Sorry. But in reality, he's going to be a very skilled shooter for this team. Solid man-and-team defender, really underrated there. Just a guy who... I've seen a lot of Luke Longley comparisons. A guy who's gotten brought up in our Bulls team preview before. But I've seen the comparisons. I think they might be pretty apt. This is a guy who's going to really fit in well into that triangle. He isn't going to put up the best numbers, but he is probably the second best post-up player on this entire roster, and probably the best triangle big man on there. As much as I love Amar'e, in terms of how well his skill set fits into the demands of the triangle offense, he is probably the best on this team. So I wouldn't be surprised if he actually had a really solid year. Speaking of a guy who might have a solid year, Quincy Acey. He's known as like a rebounder and an energy guy, but if you watch their preseason games, Derek Fisher has been experimenting with him shooting a lot of mid-range jumpers, and I'm not a fan of mid-range jumpers, but in the triangle, I get it. You're gonna get them.
Yeah.
So he's been hitting it pretty well. Sample size, sample size is a big thing with that. Statistical noise. We are not out of that just yet. After a few games, but it looked pretty well. It's something to keep an eye on. If he can hit that reliable shot, shot reliably and continue to be a good rebounder and just an energy guy off the bench, that's pretty valuable, especially relative to cost.
Yeah.
Travis Outlaw's here. I don't really expect him to do much. No offense to Travis Outlaw, but I don't see him getting that many minutes. He can play multiple positions, so I guess that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But it's not like he had a good year in Sacramento last year. I think he's pretty much here as roster filler, no offense to the guy. But two guys who aren't here as roster filler.
Your boys!
My boys, Anthony Early and Thanasis Antetokounmpo.
Yeah.
Yeah, Anthony had a really solid year at Wichita State. And I think that he slipped in the draft because he's kind of old.
Yep.
For a rookie, he's like 23, I think. There's
an age bias for sure.
There totally is. People think senior in college is senior citizen.
Yes.
But he has a really good stroke, but he's going to struggle off the bounce. But he has a skill he can contribute with right away, and for a rookie, that's always super valuable.
Yep.
Tim Hardaway Jr. was able to contribute last year based on his stroke as a rookie. And he had a really solid rookie year. It was definitely a good thing for this team. So I think that Early isn't going to get anywhere near the same number of minutes that Hardaway did, but he could definitely fill a role. Another guy I'm pretty excited about here is Thanasis Antetokounmpo.
Yes.
He had a really solid year in the D-League, and the thing that's crazy is that he somehow found a way to be just as likable as his brother.
Very tough to do, but he accomplished it.
Exactly. Josh and I remember, had a discussion a while back about what 5 NBA players we'd invite to a dinner party.
Yep.
And I had a really tough choice between Kevin Durant and Giannis. Because on one hand, like, Kevin Durant's one of the best players probably ever. On the other hand, I'd feel really bad if I didn't invite Giannis to the dinner party. And the same thing can be said about Thanasis in terms of just being, a good dude from a really cool family that you just want to, you would feel totally comfortable letting these guys crash on your couch.
I would love to play board games with these guys.
Exactly. And just, tell stories and just be all giddy and happy and innocent and shit.
Yes. They are delightful.
Exactly. But on a more serious note, he did have a really good year out in the D-League. One thing that impressed me with him is that this is a guy who was fighting for be a first-round pick. Yet he still only scored 12 points per game. And you could look at that like, well, he underperformed, well, he did that, well, he did whatever. But I think it points to, and maybe Josh could fill in on this a bit, what I think that points to is knowing your role, knowing your place, and being really team first. And as a defensive kind of glue guy who isn't the most reliable three-point shooter, doesn't have the most polished offensive game yet, and doesn't have the same length that everyone is fawning over Giannis for, he still contributed, stuck to his strong suits, and didn't chuck, essentially. And for a D-League guy to not chuck, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
In the D-League is Chuck City.
Pretty much.
The D-League...
It's Chuck Wagon.
Yeah. The D-League could turn... the D-League turns Pablo Prigioni into J.R. Smith. Not seriously, but, you get it.
Yeah.
It makes you put a... because it's so dependent on... especially in a situation like Thanasis, where... basically... putting up box score stats is the difference between getting a guaranteed first-round contract and a lesser guaranteed, lesser paying second-round one. That was a multi-million-dollar decision for him to shoot a lot or to be play his role. And he chose to play his role. And I find that to be very admirable. And I think that he knows what he's good at. He accepts what he's good at. He accepts what he isn't good at. Not to say he doesn't, work hard in his game or anything, but rather it's like, hey, I'm not going to be the guy to go out and shoot a bunch of perimeter shots and or style on them or really be the biggest offensive ball stopper, ball dominant sort of dude. But what I can be is a really solid defensive role player, and that's not a bad thing. That's
Not
very
at all.
valuable, and when you can get that in the late second round, you should be pretty happy.
Yep.
So all in all, I like both of their picks in early. Anthanasis probably spends most of this year in the D League. Funnily enough, also called the Knicks.
Yeah.
Which is pretty lazy, but he is definitely someone where if I'm a Knicks fan, I am going to the Westchester Knicks games and watching this guy ball, or at least watching him on, like, 'cause they put all their games on YouTube. Look him up because he's going to be a really solid player, hopefully for you guys.
Yeah.
Speaking of really solid players for the Knicks, Tyson Chandler was a really solid player for the Knicks for a long time, and he's gone this year. Why don't you talk a bit more about that, Josh?
Yes. So Tyson last year wasn't quite as good as normal. Part of that may have been some off-court stuff, may have led on to the on-court stuff. But Tyson is an elite rim protector, and more importantly, what Will and I call a defensive linchpin. Most people refer to these guys as anchors, but I call them linchpins.
Yeah,
because
anchors aren't
if you
mobile. These
pull
guys
a
are.
linchpin out, everything collapses.
Exactly, and you can't really move an anchor very well, and Tyson Chandler can move to guard that pick
Yes,
and roll.
exactly.
Guard that pick and roll.
So not only is he a capable rim protector, but I mean he's a big who can defend pick and rolls well. He calls out the coverages. He gets his teammates where they need to be, and basically he's the central component of their team defense.
Yes.
And they're going to miss that this year. Like I mentioned earlier, Stoudamire is going to be able to protect the rim and hit the boards decently, but he's not going to bring that defensive linchpin stuff that Tyson brought.
No.
So Tyson is going to be missed a lot.
Yes.
One guy who won't be missed a lot is Raymond Felton.
Yeah.
He had a pretty poor year. Maybe some of that is due, same with Tyson, off-court stuff maybe bled into on-court stuff with, some gun possession stuff that he had to deal with. But Felton had his lowest points per 36 minutes in his career, and he shot very poorly across the board, 31.8% from the field.
Yeah.
He shot decently from three, 39.5%. But only 72.1 from the free throw line. He's been a pretty capable point guard over his career, and even had a nice little chemistry with Amar'e Stoudamire in his first stint with the Knicks. Mm-hmm. But his absence won't be pronounced this year with Calderon, Prigioni, and Larkin on the roster.
Yeah, they upgraded him in a major way in that Dallas trade. Okay. So, speaking of upgrade in a major way, the Knicks did bring in quite a few people this year.
Yep.
And because of that, they have a possession delta of 14.9, which basically means that there are 14.9 more shots and turnovers coming in than there are going out through Chandler and Felton.
Yeah.
So, people are going to have to take smaller roles. Is there anybody you think might be taking a smaller role this year?
Calderon's probably not going to get quite as many shots as he did in Dallas.
Yeah.
Stoudamire's not going to get many shots.
No.
Melo is still going to get a lot of shots.
Amar'e
should get his fair amount of shots. Everyone else will probably have the screws tightened just a little bit. But
like
then
JR
again, when shifting to a triangle offense, that means more shots to whoever's open, assuming that they're able to get a good handle on the triangle and run it well. It's one of those offenses that is kind of geared to get everybody involved to some extent. So it's hard to say exactly how that's going to play out, but you know Melo is going to get his. And Amar'e's probably going to get a decent amount, too, off the bench. But outside of those two guys, it's kind of going to be up in the air in terms of who gets shot attempts.
Exactly. Exactly. Something that might be kind of up in the air is the rest for this team.
Yes.
You want to touch base on why that might be the case, Josh?
Yeah, so I did a little research before the season on what I call rest differential, which is basically just a way to look at how many 4 games in 5 days or 3 games in 4 days and road back-to-backs a team has over the course of their season compared to their opponents. Basically, a way to kind of measure how rested they are compared to opponents over the course of the season. And the Knicks' rest differential is -6. So it's not super bad, but it's still negative, which means they're going to be working at a deficit of rest compared to their opponents, which over the course of a season can swing things a little bit. So they're not having the best start to the year when you factor in the likely rest deficit.
Exactly. Speaking of having a good start, this team getting off to a good start relies a lot on them getting accustomed to the triangle offense. So the first in our 5 questions segment for this Knicks team preview is, how quickly can Derek Fisher get the Knicks accustomed to the triangle offense?
It'll probably take a little while. They probably won't really start getting the hang of it as a team until maybe around the All-Star break-ish time period. It takes a while to get it down. I mean, Tex Winter, who's the guy behind it, basically.
Yeah, Phil Jackson gets all the credit, but
Tex Winter is the guy behind it, and Tex has said before, and he's had some great players and teams play that system, and he said there was really only one player who really, really locked into it very well and played it the way he wanted it to be played, and that was Scottie Pippen. So even Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and those type of guys didn't fully lock in. So to expect them to get it to a point where they're really accustomed to it and comfortable with it soon, it is probably not going to happen. But over the course of the season, they should get more accustomed to it, and hopefully by next year, after another training camp, they should have a greater sense of comfort and ease with playing the triangle.
Absolutely. J.R. Smith said in a New York Post article that it's going to take a few months over the course of the year to understand where everybody is going to be. It's going to take a while. Yep. And usually that's from J.R. Smith, so I take it with like a grain of salt. I mean, like, whatever. It'll probably be 2 weeks for everybody else. But no, he's being serious here.
Yes. One question I have for you is, can their offense prop up what's going to likely be a pretty bad defense enough to allow them to actually make the playoffs in the East this year?
Yeah. I think I'm not so sure. I think they are a fringe playoff team, first and foremost, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I think that it could easily happen. You have Josh Smith, now that he's in a system, might be more effective because he's going to be operating more on principles than he is on isolation and whatever. I do it out wow. And I think that it could wind up working out. The question kind of becomes is, for one, how quickly does this team learn the triangle? And for 2, what I'm going to come in and say, my question for you, is does this team have the post passing and big dude shooting at the big 4 position to be the ideal triangle team? Particularly, what's going on with Andrea Bargnani's jumper?
I don't know if it's going to be the ideal triangle team. That said, they do have some bigs who can hit from mid-range pretty decently. Jason Smith, like you alluded to earlier.
Amar'e's
got a pretty solid mid-range jumper. Melo, of course, if he's shifted down to that power forward spot, which probably isn't going to happen nearly as much this year. But when he is, he can function well in that scenario, obviously. And then Bargnani's shot's been off the last couple of years, but part of that was he had a bad elbow injury in Toronto, and then obviously he injured himself last year too. So I think he's got the capabilities to be a good shooter in that role. The question is, how healthy is his elbow going to be, and can he get his rhythm back as a shooter?
Yeah, people crap on Bargnani, It's like Bargnani Amar'e. People crap on Bargnani all the time, but really, in his prime, he wasn't that bad.
It was an expectations thing.
Yeah, I mean, 17 points and 6 boards on 47% shooting, 37% from 3, decent at foul shooting, with solid man post defense, although he struggles in team defensive systems. That's really good.
Yeah, well, I think part of it was he had the number 1 pick overall working against him. The other problem is he's 7 feet tall, so people expect him to be a big, or at least expect certain things that are kind of culturally required of big men. So they expect him to crash the boards and so forth. But in reality, his skill set in his game is more akin to like a wing player.
Yeah, a wing who can play really good post defense and is surprisingly adept at blocking shots. But he's 7 feet tall, he should.
He's essentially a 7-foot shooting guard / small forward. He's a guy who not only has proven previously capable of hitting threes as a guy his size, but also that he's actually shown before pretty good ability to break the defense down off the dribble in ISOs and against closeout defenders and spot ups. So, I mean, the guy is skilled. It's just expectations were so different from what he provides that I think he got, and then his contract too, and he got knocked down perception wise.
Yeah, and I think there may be some confidence stuff going on there too, which I don't think is fair. I have sympathy for Andrea Bargnani.
Yeah.
As much sympathy as you can have for a guy who got a huge contract. But I think that if he can be healthy, I think he can definitely contribute positively in the triangle and definitely have a really big quality impact. Speaking of big dudes who can have a quality impact in the triangle, Amar'e Stoudamire said in Newsday that, quote, "I think the previous years of battling injuries people have forgot, but it's my job to remind them. To reach back to my dominant self. I feel like I'm there now. I feel like my body is feeling so much stronger, so I feel dominant." Do you think there's something to this, Josh, or is this just an athlete saying what literally every athlete says after coming back from an injury?
I'm inclined to think the latter. I like Amar'e. Seems like a good dude. Those knees are so bad though.
Yeah.
That even if he is feeling much stronger and feels he can come back, I don't know if he's going to be able to withstand the grind of an 82-game season and maybe the playoffs. Right. So even if he is feeling good and he's back closer to what he was before, he's still probably going to face somewhat of a minutes restriction. That said, I'm hoping for the former, that there is something to it, but I'm leaning towards the latter, that it's more just kind of, I'm going to come back strong and tear the league up.
Yeah. I think, kudos to him for, having that sort of optimism. But I agree. The proof is in the pudding, and there hasn't been much pudding lately.
Yes. Here's the final question for you. You might think I'm crazy. Do you think the triangle is going to help improve J.R. Smith's shot selection to the point that he could contend for another Sixth Man of the Year award?
No. I don't. And this is not a knock on J.R. Smith, but as we alluded to earlier, for one, even if the triangle improves his shot selection, which I think it will, this is already a pretty interesting wing rotation they have going on. Now they brought Clee Anthony in, and now that they have Hardaway, who's improving and got a lot of minutes last year. Shumpert's going to be back and healthy. It's a really crowded wing rotation they have going on there. So, for one, I don't think he gets the actual... I don't think he gets the minutes to put up the sort of... basically, if you want to be the Sixth Man of the Year, you basically have to be either a big dude who rebounds well and plays good defense and scores fairly well, or you have to be dropping 20 a night.
See, I'm going to disagree on this just because, as we mentioned earlier, he shot better last year, and I think the triangle is going to feature him having a little more off-ball catch-and-shoot type opportunities than the on-ball dribble into the defense, take a tough falling fadeaway contested mid-range jumper type shots. So I think his efficiency is going to improve. And on the point of the wing rotation, while there is greater depth there, Clee Anthony's not going to eat into JR's minutes much. Tim Hardaway Jr. and Amon are going to get their fair amount of minutes, but let's be honest here, outside of Melo, JR's the only player on their roster capable of generating dribble penetration to the rim consistently. So,
other than maybe Larkin.
Yeah, but Larkin's not going to get a whole lot of minutes, and Larkin's
You're
still
correct.
unproven in that regard on the NBA level. So,
Right.
considering when Melo sits, I guarantee you JR is going to be in the game. And obviously Amar'e is going to get a lot of touches in the post and stuff, but because of their otherwise seemingly lack of perimeter shot creation beyond Melo, JR is going to get his minutes. He's going to get his shots. And I think with the likely shift in a little more catch-and-shoot type opportunities, I think he might be able to improve his efficiency enough to the point where he's putting up a decent enough point total that he can appear like the East Coast version of Jamal Crawford and be at least in the discussion for Sixth Man of the Year. Does he win it? I doubt it, but I think it's possible that he might be able to get back into that convo.
Fair enough. I think ultimately at the end of the day, it's going to really boil down to how many points per game he scores.
Yep.
Because I don't think most of the voters care much at all about efficiency.
No, not really.
Yeah.
Points per game rules everything when it comes to evaluation in the NBA.
Absolutely. And I think that he is going to be in a better role and be a better player. Having said that, and I'm just going to give a quick counter, he consumed over 15 possessions per game last year, which was, quite a bit. That's a fairly sizable amount. I don't see that going up much, and he was only dropping a little over 14 a game. So even if his efficiency goes drastically up, that puts him in the 15, 16 point per game mark. I think he could do that. I think that would be enough to put him in contention. But there are some ifs involved. Speaking of things with ifs involved, we do a lot of predictions around here for our team previews, and we do them in a thing we like to call 20, 50, 80. And in that, we give a prediction that we think is 20% likely, 50% likely, and 80% likely to happen. And we do that so we can say crazy stuff that is probably not going to happen. Not never, but probably not going to happen. As well as get to touch on some things that we actually think could happen for this year. So, Josh, what are your predictions?
So I think it's 20% likely that JR doesn't have another silly distraction like Shoelace Gate.
So you think it's 80% likely he does?
Yes.
What do you think it could be?
With JR, there's no telling.
True. I mean, this last year there was so much more than just Shoelace Gate.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, wasn't there like the Twitter incident?
Yep, there was the Twitter picture that he sent out of some chick in a thong, and then there was the whole like "you want the pipe" tweet. And I think there was even some stuff involving like clubbing with Rihanna. So
yeah, there was that.
Yeah,
in when they were trying to make it into the playoffs.
Yeah,
late in the year.
JR and silly distractions kind of go hand in hand to a degree. So
I'm going to take it one further. I'm going to say it's 80% likely that the team suspends him from Twitter.
I doubt that, but it's possible. I think it's 50% likely that they make the playoffs in the weaker Eastern Conference. Like we mentioned earlier, they barely missed out on the playoffs this past year. Their offense, at the very least, should be improved this year, with Calderon taking the place of Felton and bringing in a little more wing depth. I think that'll help, along with the triangle offense. That said, their defense is going to miss Tyson, but also Derek Fisher's mentioned that they're going to try and change the defensive philosophy from Woodson's era, which was, force everybody to the middle and funnel them towards Tyson, to a more common in the NBA now philosophy of forcing them to the sidelines and away from the middle. So I think that should help. The loss of Tyson's probably going to counteract that enough to make the defense the weak link for the Knicks this year, and that's what's going to be what determines whether they make the playoffs or not. But in the Eastern Conference, I think they have a pretty okay 50-50 shot at making the playoffs.
Okay, and what's your last one?
To be honest, this is way more than 80%.
It's 100%
It's
likely.
80% likely that I would buy a Calderon or Prigioni shirt, poster, rap album, Zumba-like workout. Anything Calderon or Prigioni, it's likely to catch my eye, and I would be tempted to buy it.
I think that if Stephen Curry and Klay Thompson are the Super Splash Brothers, Jose Calderon and Pablo Prigioni are the Super Pass Brothers.
There we go. I like it. What are your predictions, Will?
So my predictions for this year, I think it's 20% likely that this team wins the Atlantic. Which, it sounds a little high, but really, I think that says more about the Atlantic than it does about this team. Sixers are laughably terrible right now. They're trying to be. The Celtics are a shell of themselves. The Nets, weren't so hot last year until the end of the year. And then even then, there's some problems there. And then the Raptors are a really solid team that I really like. But a lot is really predicated on a few players remaining healthy.
Yep.
So that could go down. And I'm saying there's a shot that this happens. Mm-hmm. I think that's 50% likely that Samuel Dalembert either does or doesn't end this year starting at center for this team. It could go either way because, hey, 50%.
Yeah.
That's how math works. Speaking of how
I'm
math
hoping,
works, we pimp nylon calculus again.
Yes. I'm hoping that by the end of the year we're seeing Aldrich or Jason Smith starting.
Why not both?
Because they'll probably want Amar'e or Melo maybe at the 4.
They don't want to
by
put
the end
they're
of
not
the
putting
year.
Melo at the 4, and Amar'e is going to be on a minute restriction. I'm just saying that'd be really cool. If
I would be okay with it. I would like it.
I don't know. But yeah, no, we are both entirely on the Cole train. In terms of really being fans of Cole Aldrich here, I think that as a rim protector and a
rebounder,
a guy who can really on the run rebounding, he's a guy who probably should be starting. The question is reputation. Cole Aldrich does not have much of a reputation. He hasn't gotten much run, doesn't have much experience, isn't very proven in terms of playing large, heavy minutes. But I think he should be given the opportunity because, let's face it, this team isn't going to be that good anyway. might as well see what's going on rather than lock in with give the opportunity to a younger, promising player who has done some really, really cool stuff that indicate he could be better now than Samuel Dalembert is.
Yes.
And I think it's 80% likely that Carmelo thrives in the triangle and triple thrives in pinch post action. Josh can probably explain pinch post better than I can, but to put it in layman's terms that are super simplified, 4 dudes go on one side of the court ish. It's better than that. And then you have Carmelo Anthony on the other side of the court, backing a dude down at the elbow. Kobe did it a lot. Jordan did it a lot. And I think it's going to allow Carmelo to really open up his bag of tricks a bit more, because things got a bit 16 jab steps and a pump fake last year.
To be fair, it's kind of consistently been 16 pump jab steps and a contested mid-range jumper for a decent portion of his career, which, considering Melo has perhaps, arguably outside of maybe Kobe and KD and LeBron to an extent, the broadest array of offensive skill sets in terms of different ways in which he can score. Yeah, unfortunately, at least for my taste, and it's more an aesthetics thing, he tends to settle for somewhat easier shots than maybe utilizing
easier to get,
all
not
of his
necessarily easier to
skills
make
to the best of his abilities. But
yeah, he has a lot of offensive skill sets the same way that most people I know have juicers. He has them, but he doesn't really use them, even though he probably should.
On that note, I'll take your juicer.
Okay,
if you're not using it, I mean.
Yeah, I'll mail it out to Portland.
All right.
I'll have to ask my mom. She'll watch now that I mention it. She'll probably be like, "Wait, I want to use it now."
At least then it'll be getting used.
True.
At least then it'll be getting used.
So. Unlike 80% of Carmelo Anthony's scoring skills.
You are right, though. I think Melo in the post is at his best. I mean, that's when he was shifted to the 4 spot by Woodson the last 2 years, mostly due to just injury to Amar'e and that he really kind of flourished a bit. And I think it has something to do with a lot of guys that are in that Carmelo Anthony mold, where in college they play the 4, but when they come to the NBA, they're maybe not ideal size for the prototypical 4 position. So teams want, and they have some face-up ability, so teams want to shift them to the small forward position. But the problem is that removes them somewhat from better rebounding position, so their rebounds generally tend to drop from the rates that they were getting in college. And it also moves their starting point offensively farther from the basket. So when you're working primarily in post-ups and facing up, you're somewhat closer to the basket, and any move to get past your defender is going to take you closer to the rim. Whereas if you're operating more from the perimeter and you're also operating against a quicker defender where you don't have that face-up advantage to the same degree that you had against post defenders, you're gonna, even if you get past them to a degree, chances are the majority of your times you're gonna wind up taking mid-range shots. Which obviously, over the course of things, tend to decrease your efficiency and your numbers a bit. So I think guys like Melo, among other reasons, Beasley, even a guy that people have forgotten about a little bit, Joe Alexander, are all guys who...
I didn't forget.
Yeah, who are all guys who are really successful on the collegiate level because they had that face-up and quickness advantage against post defenders that then were shifted to a perimeter role in the NBA where it mitigated some of their strengths. So I think Melo is much more efficient in the post, and even if he is playing the small forward more this year, which seems to be the case, he's going to get quite a lot of post touches in that triangle offense.
Yeah, exactly. The one thing we will want to keep note on, I'm going to keep note of it anyway, is that now he is operating he's much more slim.
Yep.
He lost a lot of weight this offseason. So that's going to be something that I'm going to keep my eye out for to see if that impacts his post-game at all. But ultimately, at the end of the day, he has the skill, and most of his defenders, especially at the 3, have no idea how to defend it.
Yep.
So, to wrap things up, Josh, do you think this team's going to be any good?
I think by the end of the year, offensively, it's likely they're going to be good. Defensively, narp. They're not going to be that good. I think that they should be good enough to be in contention for the Eastern Conference playoffs, but being in contention for the Eastern Conference playoffs isn't necessarily like some bright, shining accolade.
No. It's a way to get curb stomped by the Cavs.
It's not really a great like medal to pin to your chest and feel super proud about.
Exactly. I don't see this team being great either, but I don't think that's their goal. I think that they're trying to kind of hedge their bets in free agency, especially with the Amar'e and Bargnani. The Bargnani.
Yes, the
Contracts.
Bargnani deals.
The Bargnani with Amar'e and Bargnani. Like, that's a bunch of cap space. And that's going to free up. They're going to get a... Do they have their first this year?
I believe they do... No, they have their... Yeah, I think they have their 2015 first.
Yeah, because I don't
they
think you
traded
can trade
their
them in consecutive years.
2016, I think.
Right, because I'm pretty sure they put rules against... Yeah, they did put rules against trading them in consecutive years.
Oh, well, yeah, that's the Stipend rule, but yeah.
Yep. But, so we're going to see what they do with their draft pick. There are a lot of interesting centers in this year's draft class.
I know you're thinking Kaminsky.
I'd love to see Kaminsky in the triangle, but
Yes.
I highly doubt he goes where the Knicks are picking. But we're going to see what they do in the draft. We'll see what they do in free agency next year. And I don't want to say that this team is tanking, per se.
Oh, God, no.
But, no. But I think they're okay right now with being a big picture team that tries to contend in 2 or 3 years.
I both agree and disagree with you on that. I think free agency definitely is, much like the Lakers, which we discussed in an earlier video. Please check that out if you like
We'll
this
put
video.
a link to it.
But much like the Lakers, I think they're a franchise that's kind of used to being an attractive market. And they're trying to hoard their cap space so that they can turn on that vacancy sign and say, hey, come to New York, baby. Play at Madison Square Garden, the Mecca. You know,
Right.
That said, I think they also want to be competitive in the short term in order to be attractive to those free agents as well.
Oh, obviously.
So I wouldn't say that they're necessarily going to be okay with not being particularly good. They're going to try to be good this year.
Right. When I say not being like particularly good, I mean that they're okay not being like a 52-win team.
I think they're going to try for that, though.
It's not gonna. They should know it's not gonna happen. Acceptance.
To be fair, dude, everyone wants to reach for something sometimes beyond their scope. It's how people grow. It's how organizations grow. So I don't really fault the Knicks for doing that. But I agree that free agency in 2015 is the goal. That's what they're looking for. They're looking to add another core piece or two to Carmelo next offseason, and then really try to really contend after that. Yeah.
Ultimately, I think that's, where I'm at, if I'm a Knicks fan, is this year is going to be a bit rough again. This isn't going to be a bad team. It isn't going to be... I think it's going to be much more fun to watch.
Yeah.
Now there's an but just a much better offensive system in place and a much better defensive system in place, despite, no Tyson Chandler, which is a bit of a bummer. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if I'm a Knicks fan, I'm waiting to see what this team does in 2 or 3 years.
Yep.
You know, maybe even after this offseason, we'll see how it all plays down. But I think that there's a reason that Carmelo Anthony signed that huge contract. And I think it's because this team is going to be really good, and because there's a plan in place, and because of how prestigious this team is, they have a bit of a advantage in terms of being able to recruit free agents. Plus it's New York.
Yeah.
You know, concrete jungle where dreams are made of. There's nothing you can't do.
Yarp.
And then, on that note, I hope J.R. Smith doesn't trip a referee.
Yes, that would be bad.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that wraps up our 24... do you have anything to say, Josh? You're going to something.
Priggy Smalls for president.
Priggy Smalls for president. Agreed. And Calderon could be VP.
Yes.
So I think that wraps up our 2014-15 Knicks team preview. Please leave a like on this video if you liked it. A dislike if you didn't. There's a little comment section down there. Hit us up. Let us know what you think the Knicks are going to do this year. We will be reading and replying to them. And feel free to hit the subscribe button if you like this preview, want to watch some of our other ones, want to be notified of our future ones. There's going to be a bunch. We push them out Monday to Friday around 12 o'clock Eastern time. So 9 o'clock Pacific. Whatever time works with that, wherever else you are. And ultimately, I think we're out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, peace out, guys. Keep being awesome.
Take care, everybody.